because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
When there's no guest here and we have there's no pressure to
We get a little
to like perform for our, for people who were intimidated
I know, you
by
didn't even write an intro.
I know.
What the fuck?
I'm so unprepared. Oh boy, here we go. It's Cows in the Field, yo. This is a podcast where we explore philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're talking about Jurassic Park. What can I say? 1994, Steven Spielberg. He made 2 movies this year, which is completely nuts.
He's a madman.
And it took its toll on him, something we're going to talk about. Written by Michael Crichton and David Koepp, based on the book by Michael Crichton. I had read, I think, some Crichton. I don't think I had read this one.
Okay.
I had read another one. Did he write The Andromeda Strain?
You know that I couldn't tell you.
That sounds like familiar. I should double
You know
check
that I for a long time got Crichton and Grisham mixed up.
Yeah, very different people. But anyway, here we are. We're talking about Jurassic Park, and I want to start with the following question. I mean, did you watch this movie growing up, or did you watch it for the first time last night?
I did not watch it for the first time last night, but I think I did watch it for all the way through for the first time when we were dating, 2012. So no, I did not watch this as a child for a combination of reasons. One, it's scary.
Very scary.
It's super scary. And as I've already covered on Mike, like my dad had to help me get through my insane terror of any amount of scariness in movies through like a desensitization program.
Right.
And when we did that, we mostly focused on the horror genre and not action movies. But this movie is scary. And so I skipped it as a kid. And my parents really were not Spielberg fans.
Well, when did you watch it for the first time?
I think 2012.
Okay, so with me,
but I think
hey, there's this movie Jurassic Park. It's really good, right? We've all seen it. And
I had heard of it, of course. I think I had absorbed it, through the merch and through the kiddified stuff and all the toys that got sold from it. And I had seen clips of it it ended up on TV quite a lot. And so I think I saw pieces of it, but I don't think I ever saw the movie all the way through.
See, I think I had the opposite experience with the movie because I saw it so many times growing up.
Yeah,
so
your parents
uncountable
owned it.
Number of times. So much so that when we rewatched the movie, I was like, I don't actually need to rewatch this movie. I know every beat of this movie, and it had been years since I had seen it. It had been almost a decade since.
Meanwhile, I had completely forgotten about the cold open. Completely and utterly. I did not, because I think I've only seen it, maybe this is my third time to watch it.
It's entirely possible I saw this movie in theaters, and it's very scary.
You're so brave.
I would have been 10. I mean, it's very scary, but it's actually funny. I mean, my brother refused to watch it for a long time, so I'm just putting him on blast right now. But he was so scared.
Yeah, because he like an infant when he was 3 or 4 years old when this movie came out? No, 2 when this movie came out.
But I mean, it's not like we were taking him to the theaters. But I'm just saying, he would have been like 16, 17 and we refused to watch. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. But it's a really good movie. And I think that was the reason we would come back to it again and again. And that was on all the time. And then I think, friends would it was a movie that people would want to watch.
I just had this totally wrong. And because my folks were not that big as Spielberg fans, because I had kind of passed it by and it was sort of became part of the sort of mix of 90s movies that I did not partake in, say Armageddon. I kind of just thought it was a little bit more disposable than it was. I thought it was just part of many, many, many action flicks from that period of time that were not particularly special. And so when we watched it in 2012, I was like, what? This is a perfect film. I didn't know that it was a perfect film.
Yeah.
How did I not know that?
It has a lot of things that you like in movies in that it has horror elements, but it also has,
nerd elements.
Well, it has sort of deeper themes and it's not really a straightforward horror film. It's like a horror film transposed into a pop film. A little bit like how Titanic is a kind of horror film inside of the pop romance sort of
Totally.
grandeur of Hollywood type film. Yeah, I mean, this film does a lot right. I think it has really effective storytelling. As I mentioned, it's blending genres and it's blending them really effectively in a way where it's almost transcending genre. You know, you can't really classify it except for blockbuster, but within even blockbuster, it's scarier than most blockbusters. It has more going on under the hood than most blockbusters. I think the other thing that is to its credit is it's the way it deploys the narrative is incredibly efficient. It doles out the narratives quickly and efficiently and never feels like it's dragging. And the character development is done, again, very efficiently, but also in ways that are really interesting and tie into the larger themes of the film.
Absolutely. There's no piece of information that does not come back, it feels like. Everything you find out about a dinosaur, you're going to see it,
Right.
you know, in a violent scene of somebody's death. Or not. But sorry, what were you going to say,
Yeah,
Justin?
so I mean, I wanted but before we get to the dinosaurs killing
Yeah.
people, let's start with how the characters get to Jurassic Park.
Mhm.
So the film starts with this cold open and a guy gets killed by a dinosaur. This creates a lawsuit for John Hammond, who's running this island where he's sort of playing God, creating these dinosaurs. We later learn that he's been extracting their DNA in this complex recherche process and then sort of cloning them using frog DNA. And he needs, in order to assuage his investors, he needs to bring in some experts to sort of give a thumbs up to the lawyer. And the lawyer who represents, I believe,
to say this is safe and viable is what he needs.
I guess
essentially.
so. But the funny thing is that he doesn't bring in any safety experts. He only brings in paleontologists
Right.
and a chaos theory person.
No, the chaos theory person is is there.
That's
from the
from their
lawyer.
lawyer side. Okay,
The
so
lawyer brought the chaos guy to be like, it's gonna be chaos.
And so he
It's
brings
not safe.
So it's his thinking, like, well, I'll bring paleontologists because they're going to be like, whoa, dinosaurs. Who loves dinosaurs more than a paleontologist?
Right.
Is that the thought?
I think so. I think
Yeah.
they're gonna be like,
Rather than
this
like,
is a worthwhile pursuit that is important and entertaining, but also like a scientific, you know, incredible discovery. And so we are going to argue for why it should be.
yeah,
Why it
even
should
though it's supposed to be a safety measure, right? It's like the safety protocols are what was at issue here. Nobody
Yes.
is in doubt that this is an
that it's
amazing
cool.
thing.
Yeah, no.
I mean, who would doubt? This dude brought dinosaurs back from the dead. That you don't need a paleontologist to tell you that's cool.
That's incredible. Yes, no, I agree with you. And don't worry too much about it.
Yeah. So anyway, he gathers this ragtag group of misfits, and we've got Sam Neill as Dr. Grant, who's a paleontologist. Laura Dern as Ellie, who's a paleobotanist.
Botanist.
Okay, yeah. Jeff Goldblum as Ian Malcolm. He's the chaos theoretician. And then you've also got Martin Ferrero as Gennaro, the lawyer. And so they all go to the island. They see some dinosaurs. They meet up with Hammond's grandkids, and all hell breaks loose.
I tell you what, why don't you come down, just the pair of you, for the weekend? I'd love to have an opinion of a paleobotanist as well. I've got a jet standing by at Giotto.
Oh, look, I'm sorry. That's not possible. This is we just dug up a new skeleton.
Well, I could compensate you by fully funding your dig.
And this is a very unusual time.
For a further 3 years.
Where's the plane?
Yeah. Okay.
The thing I thought was really cool watching the movie this time. This is the first time I've watched it really as an academic and really thinking about like, oh yeah, now I do have to go get funding like these paleontologists. And it is funny. It was a funny quirk of the movie that, yeah, they don't want to go to the island. Hammond's like, you want to come? It's going to be amazing. And they're like, well, we're digging up a dinosaur, right? That's like what our job is. And he's like, well, I'll fund your dig for 3 years. And at that point, Grant and Ellie are say, sure.
They're like on the plane.
Let's go. And so, yeah, I think that is both a quirky, funny thing for me, but it also plays into the first theme that I want to talk about today, which is the relationship between science and money and also commodification,
Mhm.
right? This is this feature that I think a lot of people who do research face, an aspect of research, which is that you have to sell your research to people. And so this interplay, I think, is at the core of scientific research. And I think Crichton, being a science type writer guy, knows this world. And that's how we're thrown into it. And I think one of the things that when they get to Jurassic Park, you get Hammond sort of at one point talking with Ellie. This is after things have gone bad. And he is sort of saying it from his side. So she represents the scientist, the seeker of truth, and so on. And he tells his side of the story. And he's not a scientist, right? What is he? And he says, well, my first attraction was a flea circus, which, as we all know, I never caught this when I was a kid. I never understood what he meant by this. But of course, a flea, it's an illusion, right? It's just a very small diorama thing. And you're supposed to tell enough of a story that kids will imagine a bunch of fleas dancing around and doing things, but it's fake. And that's what Hammond is at the end of the day. He's a salesman and a showman and a faker. He's like a circus guy, ultimately. And
he's the great and powerful Oz.
Exactly. He's Oz. And so he knows how to commodify and bring to the masses the research that the paleontologists and the geneticists and all these people have been working on, and the hackers, right? He knows how to take that research out of the hands of these people who have, no people skills, right? Think of all the people who are working behind the scenes in Jurassic Park. No people skills, right? But he is incredibly charismatic. He has such people skills. He's so good at creating that sense of awe and that joy in people, right? And he's so convincing. Even to the end of the movie, you're like, this guy's bad, but he's also, I kind of love him.
Yeah, I know. You feel sorry for him when even though this is all his fault, and it's a dumb idea. He should have seen this one coming. But yeah, I do feel sad for him when he's just sitting there eating all his melted ice cream.
But that's what it is. He is this guy who can sell anyone on anything and make you love him. And I think that the scientist, the researcher, the sort of cave troll, so to speak, working away, needs that type of person as well to sort of survive. It's an ecosystem.
It's an important partnership.
And, I think, of course, on the other hand, Hammond is accused of Malcolm at one point of being a thief. Right? He says you stand on the shoulders of giants and you steal from them, from their ideas, but you don't really understand them. So he's accused of basically not being able to appreciate the science he's using because he's not himself a scientist. He's not actually in the trenches doing the research.
Right.
He's just profiting from it. And so that's the flip side, is that, he's ultimately a faker. Right. And as a result, he fails to foresee the consequences that all these other scientists can foresee.
Right. Sorry, I just thought about him as he's not quite Elizabeth Holmes, but he's kind of, right? He's got all the showmanship.
Yeah.
And he feels like something ought to be, and he doesn't actually know how it's going to happen.
Well,
in this case, he does have the
I
science.
think it's Steve Jobs. I think he's more like Steve Jobs. Like Elizabeth Holmes, because she was a liar, right? He actually did have the technology. But what he could do that Wozniak couldn't do was he understood how to package it, right? He understood how to take this thing, which Wozniak could only see as ones and zeros, and envision it as, the iPad. That's the world we live in, right? I mean, that is, people are going to want to use technology for leisure purposes, or whatever it is, scientific results for leisure purposes, and you're going to need people who can interface that. Because if you want to continue doing the research, you need to basically have that kind of output, so to speak.
Right. That was the thing that when I was in fundraising in the universities, we talked a lot about the universities should be the places where, where scientists and academics can continue to find funding for something that doesn't immediately have a commodification plan, that doesn't immediately go into production of some product that people can buy, blue sky research. And even then in universities, it's becoming, harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of research that it's not exactly a one-to-one, but paleontology is there's no dollar sign And at the end of that pursuit of knowledge for paleontologists, they're just trying to find out what happened behind us. And there's not necessarily any way to make money from that. It's like the equivalent of blue sky research where we don't know where it's going.
That's
really.
right. That's the thing is that, you know, there's a sort of pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. There's that. But it's hard to convince people of that. Right?
Yes.
But on the flip side, it's like not everything has an immediate payoff. But the other thing is that you don't necessarily know what the payoff in terms of
some of the most
practical
important
value.
Discoveries come from like not having a plan that way.
Yeah, my favorite example of this is the computer. We're sitting here recording this on a computer. You're listening to it on an iPhone, probably. You know, that the computer was an invention that came about because a bunch of logicians and mathematicians were trying to figure out what would happen if you could run algorithms, basically. And they were just working out theoretically what this thing that they called a computer would do. And they were just trying to figure out, okay, like let's think about the basis of computation, what computability is, and if there are limits to it. And they figured it out really quickly, actually. They figured out what there are theoretical limits to computation and computability, like what kinds of things can be computed. Those were done by philosophers. Those results were found by philosophers and logicians. When they were working that out in the 30s, nobody was gonna foresaw the iPhone,
or
you know,
about the home computer.
Yeah,
the
there was
iPhone.
no such. There was
not.
Nobody's thinking about that.
Yeah,
and so you know, that's what I always tell people is like, yeah, philosophy. Who knows what the output is going to be? You know, I think that you know, being open-minded is funding research that doesn't look like it's going anywhere.
Right.
Not because necessarily you're gambling that it will, but just you're open-minded and you think, well, let's see what happens, right? Because it could not just lead to interesting practical benefits for people, could open up new avenues of research, which themselves could lead to practical benefits, or they could lead us to see the world in new ways and all these things. So, you know, it's one of these interesting connections where I think a lot of times people only see the immediate, right? If they're Hammond type people, they only see the science for how it can benefit, right? And they're not necessarily thinking maybe long term or thinking the science for its own sake. I mean, it's the same for art. I mean, you came from the world of art history, and this movie embodies that tension that you really feel in Steven Spielberg's career.
Yes.
Of art for its own sake, right? Like the important art of, say, Schindler's List, the movie that he made also in 1994, and a kind of commodity that is created for the consumption and pleasure of individuals. So it's not sort of artistic in the same way. It's broader and it's intended to serve a different purpose. But Spielberg kind of embodies both of those.
I wonder if Hammond and Spielberg are like in having a kind of ambivalent or dual relationship to the commodification, the money part of art and entertainment. What I was interested in about Hammond is that he talks about spare no expense. Of course, he wants this park to be successful, but I think his focus is mostly on bringing awe to people and inspiring people, and he wants to entertain people most of all. And he sort of understands that in order to have that happen, like there has to be money exchanging hands, right? Mm-hmm. There has to be a gift shop. But I don't get the sense that what Hammond is about is like, I really want to make this much money on like admissions and this much money on the backpacks and this much money on the food. Like he talks about the blood-sucking lawyer a lot. You can tell he kind of has a disdain for somebody who's interested in that kind of bottom line or that kind of profit.
He even says that we should cap the admissions prices.
Right. He wants it to be for everybody, which you feel like too, Spielberg wants to make art for everybody, right? His movies are accessible and family friendly because you get the sense he wants everybody to like be entertained and experience awe and wonder in his films. He also understands that in order to continue making films, they have to be successful. And that's not just like the box office, but there's all the other stuff around it too, right? Like I feel like there's this, when you see the backpacks, the Jurassic Park backpacks in the gift shop, it's meant to be sort of like gauche or eye rolly or like, ugh, like this the dinosaur part is really cool, but it's kind of gross that they finished the gift shop before they've even finished the park. Like that's something that they were thinking about. It's sort of corny, the backpacks. And yet at the same time, in 1993, you could go and buy that exact backpack at Toys R Us, like immediately. And Spielberg also knows like he's got to make movies that, have like toy deals with Mattel, right? It's like all part and parcel with it. And I feel like there might be some parts of that he does not love. But he understands that in order to be like an entertainer, you have to have a certain relationship with that stuff.
You're right. I mean, film is also a populist medium, right? It's not the long form New Yorker article or the novel or it's the most populist form of entertainment we have. I mean, maybe now it's television, but film was that in its time. And so I think you're right. Spielberg isn't trying to break with who he is as a populist entertainer, but there's a sort of fraught relationship there.
There's a definite criticism of capitalism in this movie. There's a criticism of capitalism and this, pure, tunnel vision drive for profit in Jaws. And yet those two movies are blockbuster films that made a lot of money and allowed Spielberg to continue making movies that make a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's like part of his identity is that he makes blockbusters. And I think he like embraces that, but yet he loves these movies that are also critical of greed and capitalism. It's just funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I was just saying is I think there's like a kind of tension in this like, well, I'm an artist and I don't care about money, but then you're in this populist medium. And I think Spielberg kind of recognizes that and embraces the populist side of it as well. And that's maybe to your point. And, I mean, as opposed to someone who's like, I make movies, but like only for people who are really smart. And you're like, well, why are you making movies then? You could do anything else.
Right.
Like, this costs a lot of money. The whole goal is it's seen by lots of people. If you wanted to just create something that is only going to be engaged with by 50 people, then you should be a philosopher.
Right. 50 people. I mean,
if you're lucky.
Trying to toot your own horn over there.
If you're lucky.
But yeah, I wonder like if the blood sucking lawyer is sort of like a little bit meant to be like a producer, somebody in of a suit in like Universal who are immediately like, we're gonna make 15 of these. We're gonna have toys. We're gonna like they're thinking like way beyond the edges of the movie. And Spielberg's just like, I want this to look really good. Again, I want people to be like, holy crap, when they see the T-Rex, he's like focused on the story and the movie itself, and everybody else around him is like, all right, like when we make this much box office, we're going immediately to Jurassic Park 2, put it in production,
Right.
Which
the Jurassic Park theme world,
they're already building it at Universal, cartoon show, toys, McDonald's tie-ins,
right,
all that stuff.
Yeah.
And poor Spielberg, like he's like, I'd like to make a movie about the Holocaust. It's going to be really good and quite consumable, quite watchable. It's just not going to have any McDonald's tie-ins.
Yeah, and
Universal's like, do you have to?
Oh man, I mean, yeah. Well, the Universal was like, you had me at the Holocaust. No.
And we can charge anything we want, $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day, and people will pay it. And then there's the merchandise. I can personally.
Donald. This park was not built to cater only for the super rich. Everyone in the world has the right to enjoy these animals.
Sure, they will. What, we'll have a coupon day or something.
I mean, the other aspect of it that seems infused in the movie is that all the central plot points of the movie are monetarily motivated.
Yes.
I mean, as we mentioned, the way Hammond gets the scientists to the island is by
promise of funding. The whole reason the lawyer is there in the first place is this $20 million lawsuit, which has gotten the hackles up of the investors, which has sent the lawyer to Jurassic Park, which has asked for them to have somebody to weigh in on whether or not this park is safe and viable.
Yeah.
And of course, then the whole reason the dinosaurs escape is because what is the name of the character?
Nedry.
Dennis Nedry asked for a raise, didn't get a raise from Hammond, and now decides to sell dinosaur embryos on the side.
Yeah. Right. So it's like, in a way, it's this greed is the downfall of maybe what would have been a perfect dinosaur utopia.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, on both ends. I mean, it's like maybe there's even a conversation where Nedry is like, you should pay me more. And Hammond is like, that's your problem. Your money problems are your money problems.
Yeah.
And as much as he talks about sparing no expense, he constantly says spare no expense, spare no expense on all of the, gadgets and the ice cream, but he's not paying his staff well, apparently. I mean, who knows how much Nedry wanted, but I don't doubt that he's probably not getting paid enough considering he's automating an entire park full of dinosaurs.
I'm totally unappreciated in my time. You can run this whole park from this room with minimal staff for up to 3 days. You think that kind of automation is easy? Or cheap? You know anybody who can network 8 connection machines and debug 2 million lines of code for what I bid for this job? Because if you can, I'd love to see him try.
Sorry about your financial problems, Dennis. I really am, but they are your problems.
Oh, you're right, John. You're absolutely right. You know, everything's my problem.
I will not get drawn into another financial debate with you, Dennis. I really will not.
There's been hardly any debate at all.
I don't blame people for their mistakes, but I do ask that they pay for them.
Thanks, Dad.
It is interesting that you're right, that it's Nedry who's the computer guy, right? Who is the one who feels underpaid. So it's almost like Hammond is thinking, well, there are these people who are doing the real work. They're making dinosaurs out of nothing.
Right.
And this guy's just hacking around on his computer like he's doing computer games.
Yes.
Like that guy's just a joke.
There's a real dismissal of Nedry. Absolutely. And then he realizes, I mean, when he's sort of shoveling ice cream in his face and panicking and about how everything's gone wrong, he's like, well, we relied too much on automation. Automation was the problem. The computers were the problem, and not the fact that he brought dinosaurs back to life.
Maybe it's also that, again, Hammond is trying to get away from what he felt was the kind of illusory beginnings of his, work as the flea circus. There's nothing behind the curtain. Okay, now there's something real. We've got these people and there's hatching dinosaur eggs and you get to touch them. And then what Nedry's doing is kind of like in the illusion department. It's just typing code and it's all numbers and it's who knows what's going on. And it's this kind of a kind of magic in a way, because there's nothing tactile about it. At one point, Samuel Jackson is like, he says I hate this hacker shit, because you're just looking at the, it's like, I just want this to work, right? I can't smash it.
Right. I mean, that's also how Sam Neill's character feels about computers too. He wants to live in another period of time. He loves dinosaurs. He hates computers.
Yeah, it's like whenever he tries to touch or go near
he hates computers.
That's right. All these guys hate computers. Well, the 90s was it's a fashionable time to hate computers.
Really?
Well, it was the transition. I mean, it was like pre-internet. Really, no one was really on the internet.
It's true. This movie does seem to create dichotomies between pro-computer people and con-computer people. Because in the two kids, too, Lex is a self-described hacker, and Tim sort of rolls his eyes at her, and he's like, she never tries anything. She never goes outside. She doesn't live real experiences. She's a hacker.
Yeah, I feel like that's right. I think the 90s was, in a way, 90s and early aughts were like the last time you could be basically just, you could just be a normal person who had no engagement with computers.
Right.
Now it's, you can't, right? half of your life will be spent on the internet. Sorry.
Right.
But back then I think, you could just be like, I'm an outdoor kid. I don't play with it. I don't have an iPhone. Or whatever,
It is fun. I mean, and this is a movie that straddles practical effects and CGI.
Right.
Too. It's a bridge movie in that sense. So it's funny that these characters are also kind of playing out being on either side of pro or con computers.
Of these two things. Yeah. And I mean, the CGI does look good for its time. I mean, the worst shot, I think, are the bright daylight shots, I think.
Yes.
Of that.
It's smart that they went to nighttime pretty quick.
Because the daylight shots, even at a distance of the dinosaurs, are lacking. But then they don't actually have that many VFX shots in the film. But what's so impressive is that because they're still in this age of practical filmmaking, when they can do it practically, they do it. So anytime there's a close-up of the dinosaur, that is a dude in a suit, right? Basically, I mean, it's an animatronic thing or whatever. And it's kind of there's nothing quite can replace that. Like Grant leaning his whole body on the sick Triceratops, right, as he's breathing. every time one of the one of the dinosaurs, either the T-Rex or the Velociraptor, puts its nose near a window and snorts,
Yeah.
and you get the puff of air, it's incredible. And I could imagine that would be very, very difficult to render in a computer. I mean, not even back then, compared now, I don't think you could do it.
No,
And
I mean,
in a way that would feel and look real.
yeah.
Because you get the steam as it sort of recedes off of the glass.
I mean, Fincher is so good at sneaky CGI, and I still feel like that moment where you can see their breath outside when they're outside of a party at in Social Network is so obvious. Like steam is really and smoke is really hard to quite get on CGI.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a close up.
Yes.
Right, you're doing close up, and you have to capture the sort of moisture as it goes on the glass and then recedes. I mean, it looks great, and it reminds you. That's the thing, is it's such a smart thing because it reminds you that these things are real. They're breathing.
They're warm.
And they're warm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really an intense thing, and it's such a smart way to sell the illusion. Also, I mean, I just think the practical effects of the dinosaurs are great. Like the skin of the Triceratops it's all like mottled and ridgy. It has all these like dry, crusty bits on it.
Yeah,
you
it's like a
know?
lizard skin, right?
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think that is the kind of tactile thing that it's so difficult to do with CGI. I mean, it would require immense amounts of rendering, and even then, I don't know if we're there. So having that for all the close-ups is so smart. And trying to do as much close-up as you can, right? I mean, the T-Rex is mostly practical. It only goes CGI when you get a wide shot like of him walking or something.
Mhm.
But most of the time it's really scary because you go in the car with the kids, for instance, and they're in the car and the T-Rex is pushing him. Maybe after he pushes him over, and you sort of see the nose come down and the eye dilate, and all those things are done in close-up, so you're getting the perspective of the kid, and then you see the T-Rex right there, like, and it's so extreme. And I think that's the scene that, if you're gonna say, oh, this is a horror movie, it's that scene.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Velociraptor stuff is great too, and is quite scary, but that is such a standout sequence, the T-Rex sequence, that really is a high watermark for like Steven Spielberg scenes in any movie that he's done. It's so good, and I'll say one more thing about it, actually. We're going to talk about it a little bit more at length in a second, but the other thing is the music drops out.
Mm-mm.
The music has this, I mean, we should also just say the music is great. John Williams, it's obviously a classic score. What else can we say about it? But the music is this soaring, majestic, awe-inspiring score. And then when the music drops out, and it's just the noises of the T-Rex and the growling,
And crunching
and
of the car as it's getting like just scrunched up like a can.
and they're screaming.
Yeah.
And you're hearing the rain, the pitter patter of the rain on the roof and everything. I mean, that's what I think it adds to the terror. Is so far you're just like, I'm on this like theme park adventure, and it's got this cool music, and I'm lifted up, and then the music is gone, and all of a sudden it's like the safety belt came off,
Right.
and now you're in free fall, and it's terrifying.
Turn it off! I'm sorry! Turn it off! What's your nonsense?
The other theme I wanted to mention, which, gets at anything bad that will happen, or sorry, that can happen, will happen. That's the attitude of Ian Malcolm, the chaos theorist. And I think what's kind of interesting is that Malcolm he's sort of set up as the like counterpoint to Hammond. They have sort of a completely opposite viewpoints. Malcolm has this, anything goes attitude. There's no one. Don't take any responsibility for anything because nothing's really in your control anyway. Everything's just random. And then Hammond, who thinks maybe nature is random, but I'm not. I can control it. I can control nature, and I can bend it to my will. And by doing that, he undertakes the responsibility, and he fails, right? And that's his failure ultimately in the movie. Is he creates this stuff, but he's not able to do so safely and ensure everyone can be well. I think when you think about it in terms of chaos and order in that way, now think about Malcolm, who's we learn that he's had many children, different women. He doesn't seem to take responsibility for anything, right? He's just like living this kind of
I mean, his response
devil
to
may
you
care.
have kids is what can happen will.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, he's just like, yeah, I spread some seeds around and some of them grew into kids. Look
Yeah.
at that. Like as if he didn't have anything to do with it.
Exactly, because he
Yeah.
doesn't think that he is really responsible because he's just like, well, it's random. It's like I'm just rolling dice.
Yep.
And I think that's an interesting contrast. I mean, I think also this is in the topic of children and procreation, of course.
Yeah.
Which is we learn very early on something that Grant and Ellie are talking about, right? And Ellie wants kids, Grant's not totally sure. Creation is this act. Either it's an act of will if you're Hammond, or it's random in the case of Malcolm. But if you believe that it's an act of choice, as Hammond does, and I think as Grant does ultimately, then you have to recognize that you bear responsibility for that creation. And I think that's one of the things I think that's one of the things I think Grant is concerned about. And it's that, you're going to have kids and you're going to have all these responsibilities, and he wants to be at his dig site and he doesn't want to be taking care of kids.
Well, you're also making a choice to bring something into the world that you also recognize you have no control over ultimately. There is, even when you make a choice, a conscious and responsible choice to bring life into this world, there is randomness, right? Whatever comes out is whatever comes out, like genetically, right? Like he points to this kid and says, you want kids? Like, that kid's kind of a jerk. And Ellie says, well, I don't want that kid, but like, I want some species, like some like iteration of whatever we might make would be intriguing. I think I can't remember her exact line, but yeah, that's what's really scary is that Hammond thinks he can make a dinosaur and he can know everything about its genetic code and know for sure what will happen. He knows for sure they're all girls. He knows for sure none of them will ever breed. He knows for sure he can like keep everybody safe. He thinks that if he is just in every little detail of creation that he knows the outcome, and you just don't.
Yeah.
You just don't. And it's really scary.
That's right. And I think that you're right. And that's one of the great things about the film is that each of these characters has to undergo an arc with respect to this very point. So Grant ultimately has to deal with children, right? He has to be a hero to the chaos of children. He has to rescue them. And Hammond, of course, has to deal with the fact that there's an aspect of creation that's out of his control.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's interesting is that Malcolm, although there's less of an arc with Ian Malcolm, I think his arc happens, very early on in the film. So he kind of comes in, I don't give a shit about anything. It's all chaos. All right, I'm going to go have sex with someone, right? Like that's his whole vibe. He's like super horny. But when he sees the dinosaurs for the first time, he is awestruck just as much as everyone else. And what's the line he says?
You're dead. You crazy son of a bitch, you're dead.
And I love that line, and I love the line reading that Goldblum, the way he says it. And he has this kind of smirk, but that sort of betrays a kind of he's actually overwhelmed with a type of emotion. Like maybe it's even an emotion he hasn't felt for a long time, right? And I like that you see this guy humbled in a way. So I think in a way he kind of realizes, okay, yeah, you can do these acts of pure will and break through the chaos. And I think that's one of the most central themes of the film, and I think it's what ties all these characters together. And in particular, when they're having that meal and they're all chatting about their different views about things, and you kind of get the different sides and you see how everyone is interplay. I think that's really nice exposition, both for the narrative of the film, setting up, what's going to happen, but also telling you who these characters are. So I think that's all great. I think the writing on this is excellent. And actually, this is kind of funny. We watched the other JPs, not the new JWs. We watched the JPs, and they suck. So sorry, but the writing is, even though 2 is written by the same people who wrote 1, it is a sweaty exposition-filled piece of trash, and it's unbelievable how nonsensical and like overstuffed it is, compared to this movie,
it's
which
sort
is
of self-aware of how much it has to like backtrack and change some stuff, because they're like, wait, there's another island, forget about the first island, here's a new isla, and that's where all the other dinosaurs are. It was there the whole time. We just didn't tell you about it in the first movie. And then at some point, Ian Malcolm says about Hammond, he goes, "You went from capitalist to environmentalist, like in like 2 seconds flat." Like he's just like, "Oh, your characterization
I think
changed."
conservationist, because he's like interested in preserving the dinosaurs' natural habitat now, and not just like bringing them to San
I feel
Diego.
like that's like a little winky, like, yeah, we had to change some character, we had to move some stuff around. Okay, like,
I mean, it's fine. Here's the thing: I would honestly forgive all of that if the movie was actually good. If it had this like stupid 25-minute setup thing and then it was actually awesome, but it unfortunately isn't awesome. But that's fine. The first one is awesome. And
it's hard though. I don't know quite how you would do another one, because the first one is all about the awe of something you've never ever seen before. You've imagined it, and now it's big on this, it's in for the characters, it's in front of them. For us, it's on the screen for the first time. There's that, like, there's so much withholding for until you see the dinosaurs. There's so much withholding to see the T-Rex. You see the goat several times, and the T-Rex doesn't come to see the goat, and then you just see the T-Rex's eyeball, and then you just see the T-Rex's claw. There's so much like sort of teasing us, and then by 2,
you already know
what the dinosaurs look like. You can't quite relive the moment of like, oh my gosh, it's a brachiosaurus. That's sort of the magic of the first one. So I'm not sure how you do a good sequel.
I think there's more to the magic of the first one than just that.
Agree. But it's a piece of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think another similarly exciting T-Rex thing would be fun. I think that what they do in the second one is, just by contrast, just not very good. And yeah, I think you need something like that. And if it had a centerpiece like that, it would be excellent. I will say about the second one, I like the inclusion of the dynamics between the different factions, and that there are these like hunters and then these more environmentalist types. And I kind of like that. And it was when they sort of end up having to work together, I thought that was nice. So I think it's also a very weird pivot to take the funny, snarky side character of the first one and then make him like the hero. And
that's a classic sequel move.
Yeah, I mean, it's
classic. They're like, did you like this sidekick? What if you had an entire sidekick movie?
First of all, we love the sidekick, but I don't love when the sidekick gets their own movie. I think that's usually
okay, except for maybe in Cars 2 when you get more Mater. So pro Mater.
I think you're alone in that regard, but
nobody else likes Cars 2.
Haven't seen it.
Seen it 100 times.
So we've talked about the tactility of the practical filmmaking, but I now want to talk about the look of the film.
Yes.
And I want to single out one scene to just illustrate this. So this movie was shot on 35 millimeter film. Now, I'm not a only 35 or bust person. I actually think there's a lot of really interesting digital looks out there. I mean, obviously it's very popular now to say Miami Vice, but I will say I am also kind of into the look of the super high res digital. So I'll give you an example. We recently watched The Gray Man, which is a terrible movie, and it has a bunch of really ugly CGI in it. But when they're not doing CGI, they're shooting on these 6K Sony Venice cameras, and it is crisp.
Yeah,
like it is super precise.
You like to be able to see like if somebody's about to get a pimple.
Exactly,
like what's inside their pore.
I want to see the blood flowing under their skin. I want to see that level of detail. And this camera is getting you that level of detail. 35 millimeter does not give you that level of detail. Okay, so I'm just saying there's lots of different looks out there.
Luke's.
But I will tell you, there's also lots of different good looks out there, right? It doesn't always have to be film. But there's also lots of bad looks out there. And one of the things that
Just gonna get your soapbox out.
really irritates me is the use of digital cameras these days to shoot night scenes with only ambient light because they can. So let me explain what's going on here. So to back up, the scene I want you to think about in Jurassic Park is the scene after the T-Rex battle when Grant and the kids are, going down the side of, I guess, the T-Rex camp or whatever, and Tim is stuck in the car, right? It's at night. The car is in the tree. Tim's stuck in the car. They got to get Tim out, and then they go off on their little adventure. But it's all at night. And watch that scene, okay? When you watch it, you're not going to think this looks really unreal. You're just going to think it looks like they're at night. But it also looks as contrasty and as nice as the stuff that's shot during the day. It's not like suddenly we're at night and now everything looks like it's fucking gray and you can't discern anything. And it's just like a mess of gloppiness. No, it looks like it just looks clean, except it just looks like it's night. So what's going on? Well, to understand this, we need to understand how film stock works. So film stock, I won't go into that, but here's the thing. Film stock is not very light sensitive. Okay, film in general is not light sensitive. And movies in particular, feature films, are not going to shoot on high sensitivity film because it's going to have you look really grainy. So they usually shoot at low ISO films. So, 100 to maybe 400 max. They're not shooting very high ISO. Okay, if you think 400 ISO, if you ever have a digital camera, if you go 400 ISO, like that's not very much light. But what else can you do to get more light on the film? You can open your aperture, right? Let more light in, but then you create a shallower depth of field. It's harder to keep things in focus. There's no sort of equivalent of changing the shutter speed because you have this thing called shutter angle, and you have to have a certain degree of shutter angle, 180-degree shutter angle, or else the film stock's not going to expose correctly. So you're kind of you're boxed in. You just only, so what you have to do as you're shooting on film at night is you have to hide lights all over your location, right? Lights that if you were to on this film set, you'd think, whoa, this is going to look horrible. It's just like really bright lights are going to be all over the set. But those lights are strategically hidden. So in that scene I'm talking about, there's like a big tree, right? And the car's stuck in the tree. There's a huge light behind the tree. That's supposed to be the moon. And it's coming through the tree and it's blooming out everything so you can see all the branches of the tree really clearly. There's also a bunch of lights behind the camera, right, on different sides that are like probably a kind of bluish tint, and they're not high-powered lights, but they're kind of this bluish light. And they're shooting on the actors, so you can see their faces. These are lights. These are not real. They're not shooting with ambient light. Like this is all probably shot in a studio with studio lighting, but it looks good. It looks like nighttime, but it's not like any nighttime scene you've ever experienced in real life. But it doesn't matter. I think it looks great. Now, cut to today, and when you're filming on a digital sensor, those sensors are incredibly light sensitive. So a lot of digital sensors can go, there are like prosumer level sensors, digital sensors that can go to 100,000 ISO. Now, they don't look great at 100,000, but they look good at like 56,000 ISO. Those are prosumer, not even like the cameras these guys could film on. Now, of course, that will introduce a lot of digital artifacting, so they probably aren't going to go that high, but they can go pretty high in the ISO, right? We're talking like 400 to maybe like 12,000. It's quite a bit more light they're letting in. So as a result, they don't need all these studio lights to light it, right? They're just like, I just crank the ISO. We got the dynamic range, and then we can color grade it in post and do what we want. But the result is everything is the same gray, muted, non-contrasty look. It looks like, first of all, it's very hard to discern things unless you're watching on an incredibly bright monitor. And so as a result, it just looks like this gray mess. And I'll give you some examples of this. The Batman. The whole fucking movie is a huge gray mess because they shoot it digitally and they're like, yeah, we don't need fill lights. Let's just shoot, with like very low light. And it's fine that it's going to have this element of realism. Maybe it doesn't feel that way to me, but they're going for a kind of realism. But as a result, you lose contrast. You don't get like glows behind characters' heads, and you don't get a little bit of fill light to like brighten the eyes. Right? Everything's just dark. The Gray Man is another example of a movie that uses a lot of gray tones. It's in one of the early fights. It's shot in incredibly low light and looks like garbage. So I just think one of the things I loved about this movie, watching it this time, was just how good the night scenes looked. And I think it's a shame because that we've gone to this kind of gray, washed out look. Because we don't have to. The digital sensors don't have to do that. The digital sensor can mimic film. You could shoot a night scene on a digital sensor with 400 ISO and do studio lights and it'll look awesome. In fact, actually, they do that in Stars Born. They do some night shots in Stars Born that look great. And in fact, it was so good, actually, that I thought when I was first watching it that this might have been shot on film. But no, it was just lit better. So that's my plea. If there are any filmmakers listening to this podcast, I'm just kidding. Nobody's listening to this podcast. But listen, if you're thinking about making a film and you're shooting on digital, because hey, who's not shooting on digital these days? Just light it like you're shooting on film. It's gonna look great. And anyway, that's my TED Talk.
Thank you.
I mean, speaking of dinosaurs, did you have a favorite dino? I mean, there's the T-Rex. He's very big and
the T-Rex
run at 30 miles per hour.
That's where they clocked him.
He's very strong too.
I think that I did see a little bit of this on TV, and the scene that I saw was the Dilophosaurus. I don't know if I put the emphasis in the right syllable there, but the spitting one, the one that has the collar that comes out and he hisses and spits poison on your face. I saw the death of Nedry, and that I was like, nope, not watching Jurassic Park for 10 years. It scared me so bad.
That's a candidate for potentially actually the scariest scene.
Yes.
Because the terror of when you see this thing's collar and it's like hissing and this collar's moving in this really unnatural way. Yeah. And then it spits and you're like, what is this? Doesn't seem real. And it's apparently not. It's a made up dinosaur, but it feels like an alien, right? And it feels like, if it kind of reminds me of this thing in Independence Day, right? With the with the tentacles and stuff. There's just something not natural.
My body just jerked when you said it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. That guy is really scary. And
he's a made up dinosaur?
I think so. Unfortunately, there were no dinosaurs with collars that spit poison at you.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen any of those in our books. I've been reading a lot of dinosaur books with our 3-year-old, and that one has not come up, so I should have known. Although I also learned that a velociraptor is the size of a dog. It's like maxes out at 35 pounds. Which, by the way, is the weight of our 3-year-old. So that really takes the wind out of my sails for the velociraptor.
They're mutant velociraptors. I mean, that velociraptor sequence at the end, you get this kind of extended sequence where the game warden guy is being hunted, and then the kids are hunted in the kitchen, and that's also a really scary scene. So scary. Because they're also because they're talking to one another in their weird growly, whatever it is, barky growl voice, and it's really weird and scary. I find that just incredibly unnerving. I mean, forget the fact that there are kids being hunted by these things. It's just the noises they make I find really, really scary. Yeah. And just also the sort of the sheer strength of them. They jump up on the counter and they knock everything over, and they can open doors and stuff. And they're really fast. There's something where you're like, ah, crap, this thing is.
That is a pretty good cow. And they're like, unless these things learn how to open doors, and then it gets this little clock.
Yeah.
Almost immediately.
It's inside.
You've also been reading about dinosaur poo-poo.
I have.
And
been
there's
writing
a
about
there's a
dinosaur
really
poo-poo.
prominent dinosaur poo in this movie, the sick triceratops. Is that accurate, would you say?
No, from what I've seen of fossilized dinosaur poo-poo, the biggest one is like 2 feet long. So I don't, this seemed like it was like a pile that's like as big as me.
Yeah.
It was a really big doo-doo pile.
I mean, he was sick.
I know.
You
Poor
know.
guy. Yeah, I don't think that might have been a little bit. But who knows? Because the process to make dinosaur doo-doo fossil is complicated. It needs to drop in the right place and get buried and then get it's not every poo-poo that turns into a
Yeah,
fossil.
it could also
poo-poo.
be that there's some degradation before it gets buried.
True,
So,
true.
how do we know?
So maybe accurate.
Yeah.
I don't know. I used to refer to some of my sons, diaper poo-poos as triceratops. They were really big.
Someday he's going to listen to this and be so embarrassed.
I'd like come down from the changing table and tell Justin, I was like, that was a real triceratops situation up there.
You come down and you're like you got your like gloves all the way up to your armpits. Your like plastic gloves.
I know, she just like rips them off, and Ian Malcolm's like, be sure to wash your hands.
He is definitely me in that scene. I'm just like, I would have, but see, one difference is I would be wearing like a full respirator. Because you can imagine how stinky that would be. There's like flies buzzing around. I'd be in a respirator. They'd be like, where'd you get that respirator, Ian? I always carry one.
Always. So is your vote for the sick triceratops?
No. I don't know what my vote is, but I also want to just mention the Brachiosaurus, right? The big Brachiosaurus, the practical one, not the CGI one in the distance, but the practical one who sneezes on Lex. I like that one. That one's funny. It's cute.
That one feels like a real like Universal Studios ride moment, when you do like whatever the predecessor to 40X was,
Yeah.
I went to Honey and I Shrunk the Kids. Did you do that one?
Yeah, I
At
think
Disney
so,
World, and
yeah.
you got sneezed on by the dog.
It's fun, It's a good.
It was like not clear spray either. It was
What?
pretty gross.
It
No.
wasn't water?
No.
Oh,
Not
you mean
on Lex. The
Yeah,
Brachiosaurus.
sure.
That was really
There's probably
gross.
some Vaseline in there and some dino snot, obviously. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I want to pick, but those are all great dinos.
Yeah, I think just you don't have a lot of them that you're spending time with, but you kind of get to know them pretty well.
Yeah.
Or at least the T-Rex and the Triceratops and the Brachiosaurus. We kind of just focus in on a couple.
Mhm.
And weirdly, I think the sequels have too much dinosaur and not enough dinosaur.
Yeah, I agree.
You see a lot of them, but you don't really get to spend any time with them or like learn about them or
Well,
how much time you get with the Triceratops, you know?
And in Jurassic Park 2, their whole thing is that Mama T-Rex cares for her baby T-Rex. That's like the really important thing that like they're trying to establish. And in Jurassic Park 3, they're like, Velociraptors are the smartest creatures that have ever lived. That's like what they're revealing. And you're like, this is stupid.
Yeah. That's the thing too, is that maybe this movie is stupid, but it doesn't make you feel like it is ever. Like, I feel like when they're doing the little DNA video and they're just like, we put in some frog DNA and we got it from mosquitoes. I'm sitting here being like, okay.
I looked over at Laura the first time she was watching.
I'm just
She's
taking
like,
notes.
Yeah, you were taking
Yeah.
notes. You were like, oh man. Huh.
Huh.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
How come
All right.
nobody's done this?
I don't know. Like, I never have a moment where I like look away from the movie like, come on, can you get a load of this? Like,
It's great.
I'm
It's
with
really
it.
that's one of his strengths. I mean, the other one of his strengths is Samuel L. Jackson saying, "Hold on to your butts."
Hold on to your butts.
He does it twice. I forgot he does it twice.
It's so nice you have to say it twice.
That's true. And he's just doing it with a cigarette half out of his mouth. He's so like, oh yeah, he dies. I forgot. I was like, what happens to him? No,
He dies.
he's straight up eaten by a velociraptor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We saw his arm though. So that's how you know.
Man, everyone gets got except for the principals. Man, dang. It's a brutal movie.
Turns out Dinosaur Park, bad idea.
I mean, if you had a higher fence and
Less automation. Too much reliance on automation.
Definitely no computers. I would have no computers in my dino park. But I'd have it staffed with underpaid laborers.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, hey, Mr. Hammond, can we get some more money? I'd be like, hey, that's your problem. Don't bring those problems to me. I'm sure it'll go great. That's Jurassic Park. That's all we have to say about this movie. It's a good movie. It's a very
really
good movie. That's why we wanted to do this on this podcast. Because one of the things we do on this podcast is we revisit movies from either one of our childhoods or adolescences and go back to, what made them important to us, made them valuable. How did they resonate with us? And oftentimes those movies have interesting themes. And I think this is no exception. So Jurassic Park, it stands to the test of time. It's a good movie. And I quite enjoyed watching it for the 1,000th time. And next week, we are starting the Lord of the Rings miniseries.
Oh my gosh. It's already happening.
That's right. Not next week, but next time. Because we're in 2 weeks, 2 week schedule. And we'll be starting with the Fellowship of the Ring with guests Bennett Eckert and Rebecca Kwong. So tune in for that. And you can find us on Twitter at Cowspod or go on the web to cowspod.wordpress.com. That's our website. And if you want, we now have two shirt and
we have merch
designs, right? For shirts, mugs, totes. One is Werner Herzog and the other is 2 cows. So go check that out. It's cowspod.threadless.com. So check it out and we'll see you here in 2 weeks.
Hold on to your butts.